Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our deep dive this week. Well, I think it's probably my favourite deep dive to date. This is a fantastic story, not just, of course, about the one and only Handel, but about one of his most inspiring proteges, I think, one of the best people that he ever encountered during his life as a composer. And what a story this is. So get comfy. If you're watching for the first time, welcome to Home Choir. My name is Ben, and this is my channel. It's great to have you with us. And if you're watching later on, you want to just jump through this bit of preamble and a little bit of news for the home choruses and get straight to the lecture, there will be a link in the description once we've streamed this live. But to everyone else who's here looking forward to a good bit of story time, well, make sure you are comfortable, that you have everything you need. And I'll just run through a couple of very straightforward sound checks. We can hear some lovely Handel, obviously, playing as well. That's good. And make sure that I've got the keyboard here for the little bit of introduction. Let's have a more appropriate instrument. Mildly so. So I hope you're all having a good day out there. Do remember to subscribe if you haven't done so. How are we doing for subscribers today? Let's double check, shall we? Drum roll, ladies and gentlemen, please. As of Wednesday, 22nd of January 2025, Home Choir has managed to convince 5,657 people, 5657, to subscribe to the channel. Well, why wouldn't you? It's free, it's packed with fabulous music, learning, and fun. And not to mention a wonderful community, including everyone who's over here and everyone who's watching later on. So do please subscribe, and we really do thank everyone who's already done so. Hello to those who are watching live, but not in the live chat today. As always, hello to Helene and Bill and Val and Sue and Tony and Sally and Annie and Maureen and Harry and June. And also to Val and Huyen and Katie and Anne and Linda. And hello everyone over here. Who's here this afternoon? Hello to Alison, hello Angela, hello Carol, hello Christine, hello Colette, hello Dave, hello Jill, hello Emma, hello Glennis, hello Epi, hello Diane, hello Lisa, hello Michael, hello Nikki and your sister and your mum, hello Patricia, hello Sean, hello Susanna, hello Suzanne, hello Terry, hello Wolfram. It's great to see all of you. Well, thanks for being here, folks. And, well, what a great story I have to tell you in just a few moments, because as it's the Home Choir broadcast, I do need to just remind you that we have a broad range of content here on the channel, not just fascinating musical lectures and fantastic stories, but also we do a bit of singing from time to time as well. And this coming Friday, well, we are continuing with the theme of reggae music. We're going to sing One Love, One Heart by Bob Marley. Fabulous song. Come along on Friday, learn that one and sing more besides. Then we've got a Sing Sunday, which is going to be, oddly enough, all about Baroque music. Given we had Bach last week, Handel this week, and next week, well, it's going to be all about Vivaldi. In particular, which chords connect Vivaldi and Batman. Holy Harmony is Batman. You're going to find out next week. So that is coming up on Home Choir. If you want to find out more about it, you can sign up for our weekly email newsletter. Just go along to homechoir.org, fill in the form, and then you are done. That's all you need to do. Very, very simple. And we will send you a newsletter every week with links, scores, even some subscriber exclusive content. So don't miss a moment of it. And of course, we also sing happy birthday to those who are celebrating their special day. And today, Serge is celebrating his special day. So let's sing for Serge, everyone. After 2, 1, 2. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Serge. Happy birthday to you and many more. There we are. So, everyone, this is not a singing special. This is story time. It's time for one of our deep dives. We've done dozens of these now. I think this is my favourite to date because this is such a good story. Yes, we've called it Handel and the Scandal. Why? Well, it's a bit of a clickbaity title. It rhymes. The hero of this story is actually this person here, this lady, who we'll get to in a moment. But welcome all of you to our deep dive. Welcome to the story of Handel and the Scandal. It's a good rhyme, that. Well, here he is, George Frederick Handel. We know him well, Born in Halle in Germany in 1685, the same year, as we discussed last week, as Johann Sebastian Bach. And he was one of these composers who was forced to hide the fact that he was a musician from his family. His father wanted him to become a lawyer. In fact, he entered law school with the intention of becoming a lawyer whilst practicing the spinet, a keyboard instrument, in the attic so that his father wouldn't hear. When his father died, however, he pursued a career in music and set out to travel across Europe, spending time in France and particularly Italy, where he learnt his craft. It wasn't until he took up residence in London in 1712 that he found his home, the place where he would ultimately spend the next several decades and the last years of his life. He became a naturalised British subject in 1727, and bear in mind that in the early 18th century, England and Ireland were alive with theatrical and musical innovation, and Handel was the king of opera, the king of Covent Garden. And by 1741, Handel's preeminence in British music was evident, really, from the honours that he'd accumulated, including a substantial royal pension from King George II and the prestigious role of composer of music for the Chapel Royal. He even had a statue erected in his honour in Vauxhall Gardens, and here it is, when he was still alive, which is an exceptional accolade for a living person. And Handel was also the vigorous champion of Italian opera, which for a time had been without doubt the most popular form of music in London. Handel introduced it to the city in 1711 with the opera Rinaldo, from which comes the beautiful aria Lascia ch'io pianga. And over the next 2 decades, Handel wrote and presented more than 40 operas across London's various theatres, in particular, of course, Covent Garden. However, by the 1730s, things had moved on. Public taste for Italian opera had begun to fade, and this ushered in significant challenges for Handel's career. And amongst many aspects, along with the public being somewhat fickle, 20 years is not too bad to be obsessed with one particular musical form. It was the death of Queen Caroline in 1737 that was a major blow to the nation, to the form of Italian opera, and to Handel personally. She delighted in Handel's music. She was, without doubt, Handel's most enthusiastic patron. George II didn't really appreciate music to the same level of his wife, and when Caroline died, George was grief-stricken at her passing, and his feelings towards Handel cooled significantly, as people believe that hearing Handel's music very much reminded the king of what he'd lost. And so with his health in decline and with interest in Italian opera in decline, you might imagine that that was it for Handel. But no, he was a tenacious individual, and he turned his attention to writing a new form of music, that of oratorio, which is basically very similar to an opera. You have choruses, arias, solo songs, you have recitatives, duets, except rather than being about a secular subject, it's about a sacred subject. And Handel's first oratorio was Esther, seen here. And this premiered in 1732 to great acclaim, paving the way for subsequent successes such as Deborah and Athalia. Now, the popularity of these works marked, thankfully, a turning point in Handel's career, both professionally and also in his health. And this paved the way for one of the most significant musical events of the era, in fact, of musical history, of course, the premiere of Messiah. Now, it's worth taking into consideration that nowadays, oratorio is a mainstay. We're used to oratorio, and you'll see it performed in all sorts of settings, all sorts of venues. But in those days, it was a new art form. The idea of combining the sort of musical structures of opera, but with a sacred theme, well, it was seen as new, daring, and even controversial. These works trod a cautious balance between the sacred and the secular, bearing in mind that if you wrote an oratorio and it wasn't quite balanced properly, you would have problems trying to stage it. It could be seen as too secular, too theatrical for a church, and too sacred and too formal for a theatre. And this is one of the reasons that Handel was ultimately forced out of London to perform these oratorios. and ultimately to Dublin for the premiere of Messiah, where the lines were more easily blurred. Now we've spoken about Handel, it's time to turn our attention to the real hero of this story. This, everyone, is Susannah Maria Cibber. Now, she was born in 1714 into a theatrical family. Her brother was the composer Thomas Arne. So she was actually born Susannah Maria Arne. And Arne was the composer of such famous tunes as Rule Britannia and A Hunting We Will Go. A very, very popular composer at the time, not to the same extent, of course, as Handel and Bach, but still a very prominent British composer who has clearly made an impact on popular society. Now, Susanna Cibber, as she would become, was a highly gifted actress and singer, and she gained early fame on the London stage with her particularly beautiful voice. However, her career would be ruined ultimately by scandal due to a highly publicised court case featuring her husband, her lover, and many salacious details of their sordid affairs. But before we get to that, Susanna's early theatrical roles very much showcased her emotional depth and her vocal prowess. She was said to have a unique voice with incredible timbres that would really tug on people's heartstrings. She trained with her brother Thomas, and she displayed this extraordinary skill at expressing particularly pathos on stage with her contralto voice. Now, the year 1733, when she was still a teenager, this proved to be a critical year for Susanna Arne, as she was then. She met Handel whilst rehearsing and performing in his original production of the oratorio Deborah. And this was the beginning of a close and lifelong friendship. She wasn't singing one of the big main roles, but she was singing a prominent role. And vitally, Handel, who was, bearing in mind, nearly 30 years her senior and legendarily cantankerous, he was a really bad-tempered old soul. He patiently and diligently taught all her parts to her note by note, as she couldn't read music. And that's a real badge of honour for Susanna at this point. Handel just didn't do this for just everyone, as you'll find out later on when he visits Chester. Now, also in this year, Susanna's name appears in the playbills, offering entr'acte songs by popular demand at the Haymarket. And these performances became very, very popular. She was building her prominence, she was building her reputation. Now, during the 1733, I should say, to 1744 acting season, the actor Theophilus Cibber and his theatre company were introduced to the young Susanna. Now, Theophilus Cibber was the son of a playwright, theatre manager, and poet laureate, Colley Cibber. So Colley Cibber was a very, very prominent figure in those days. And his company of players was in residence at the theatre at Drury Lane at that time. Now, the Cibbers were effectively acting royalty. They were a household name, like the Redgraves in the UK, the Chaplins, the Coppolas, the Baldwins, and so on in the USA. Everyone knew that the Cibbers were acting royalty. And so in April of 1734, Susanna Arne became Susanna Cibber when she married Theophilus, Colley's son. And this marriage initially proved very beneficial to Susanna's career, as she became a regular at Drury Lane and at the London Theatre for many years, performing now under the name Mrs. Cibber. Now, even more important at this point was the attention of her father-in-law, Colley Cibber, who recognised that Susanna actually had the makings of a great tragic actress, and he trained her. She received hours of acting tuition from her father-in-law, and he helped her to learn the valuable vocal intonations and gestures that shaped her into the most celebrated tragedienne, I have to say that right, of her time. She was an incredibly gifted performer, not just as a vocalist, but as an artist of putting across the deepest levels of pathos and tragedy. And adopting a Siberian identity, as it were, proved very advantageous for Susanna's career. The public audiences began to view her as the young ingenue of the Cibber acting dynasty, which along with her undoubted talent, helped land her many, many prominent and important leading roles. Her brother Thomas, remember Thomas Arne, also benefited from this marriage as he became the house composer at Drury Lane and wrote many, many pieces for a number of plays and pantomimes over the next several years. She went on to portray numerous Shakespearean roles to great acclaim, which she later continued to perform with noted and celebrated actor David Garrick, who we'll hear more about later on. Fascinatingly, in 1737, a much-noted dispute with her arch-rival, another alto, Kitty Clive, over the part of Polly in the then brand-new Beggar's Opera erupted and inspired a satire known as the Beggar's Pantomime, or the Contending Columbine. In 1738, Susanna Cibber portrayed the role of David in the original production of Handel's oratorio Saul, and she appeared in the world premiere of her brother Thomas's immensely popular masque, which was known as Comus. And here is a little scene from it here. So her career was off to a fantastic start. Unfortunately, her marriage to Theophilus Cibber was not a happy one. Theophilus, seen here, was reportedly abusive. He was a gambler and a big spender. And in order to pay off his debts and his creditors, he began selling off some of his wife's wardrobe and some of her personal effects to raise funds. In order to pay the rent, the Cibbers were forced to take in a wealthy tenant, one William Sloper, who would later sit in Parliament as a Tory MP for Great Bedwin. Now, the resultant relationship between these three people led to a notorious lawsuit in 1738, in which Theophilus Cibber accused Sloper of assaulting, ravishing, and carnally knowing his wife. Now, that may be what he accused Sloper of, but various versions of this scandal suggest that all three may have been involved in a ménage à trois. And several accounts state that Cibber had some rather unusual tastes, including forcing his wife at gunpoint to sleep with Sloper whilst he watched. Another account places a spy in the closet at the scene of one of their trysts in order to gather testimony for the lawsuit. Ultimately, though, at trial, Theophilus Cibber was awarded a paltry £10 in damages. And this was because the people in the court felt that he had no real case. Now, this led to Susanna leaving him, unsurprisingly given the circumstances, and the following year Theophilus Cibber brought another legal case against Sloper, this time for detaining his wife. In actual fact, Cibber and Sloper had run off together and had had a daughter, one known as Molly at that point, and this time Theophilus Cibber was awarded £500 rather than £10. Theophilus' intention going into this lawsuit against Susanna was to shame her as a cruel and unfaithful wife. However, as she was pregnant with her son, with Sloper at the time of the trial, she shifted the public perception of herself to being merely an innocent woman, the victim of her husband's cruelty and greed. However, despite the general public's perception of Susanna, they were very much on her side. The association of her with this somewhat sordid scandal seriously damaged her reputation, and work in London dried up in short order. Aside from a single role in 1740, which was the lead in her brother's masque Alfred, she found no stage work at all that year. She was forced to move to Dublin in 1741 and found some decent work at a prominent theatre there, but she thought her career was all but over. But later, in 1741, of course, Handel also set out for Dublin to revive his own fortunes, and this decision meant that things were not to end in Dublin for Susanna. Now, it's important to note that Dublin itself, much like London, was a melting pot of cultures. It boasted a vibrant cultural scene and very, very supportive and enthusiastic audiences, and this provided a fresh start for Handel. In the months leading up to the premiere of Messiah in 1742, Handel embarked on a journey from London to Dublin that would further prepare him and his work for this pivotal moment. I mentioned earlier on that Handel was a cantankerous old soul, and there's this lovely story where en route to Dublin he paused in Chester to rehearse portions with Messiah with local singers. And this in many ways was to check that the part books had been copied correctly, because quite often there were mistakes that needed to be corrected. He knew he had little rehearsal time in Dublin, so a pause at Chester Cathedral was in order. And the story goes that during one rehearsal, a tenor singer struggled with a particularly challenging passage in the music. And frustrated, Handel shouted at him, "You scoundrel! Did you not tell me you could sing at sight? To which the poor man replied, yes, sir, but not at first sight. I absolutely love that story, not just because it's funny, but also because it just highlights how differently Handel treated Susanna Cibber when he first knew her. And this is important. Now, Handel was warmly received when he arrived in Dublin by the artistic and the philanthropic communities, vital for Handel's ongoing success. Invitations to private performances and rehearsals generated excitement for the upcoming premiere, which was the performance of the season. And of course, on arriving in Dublin, Handel was reunited with Mrs. Cibber. And all accounts are that he embraced her warmly on seeing her, with no trace of the scandal to sully his obvious affection for her. She would go on to perform in several concerts with him, including performances of Acis and Galatea, Esther and Alexander's Feast, which were all staged in the run-up to Messiah to raise funds for what was going to be a substantially expensive performance. Now, the premiere of Messiah, as we know, took place on April the 13th in 1742 at the now demolished music hall in Fishamble Street in Dublin. There was a plaque on the site of that spot there today. I know, I've seen it. Now, the event was meticulously organised, with proceeds benefiting local charities, including hospitals and debtors' prisons. The premiere required extensive coordination and rehearsal amongst singers and instrumentalists, many of whom were unfamiliar with Handel's very demanding style. To maximise attendance, a public notice requested that ladies refrain from wearing their hoops and gentlemen from carrying their swords. This, of course, just meant that more people could actually be fitted into the venue. And this meant that over 700 attendees crowded into the space, creating a lively and expectant atmosphere. And vitally, Susanna Cibber had been employed to sing the contralto solos. And just bear in mind that this person was the leading tragic actress of London of her time. Here she was in Dublin singing Handel's music. It must have been incredibly moving, given her unique timbre and her acting ability. And she sang perhaps the most moving aria of all of Messiah, He Was Despised. And legend has it that Dr. Patrick Delaney, the Chancellor of St. Patrick's Cathedral, on hearing her sing this incredible aria, stood and proclaimed loudly, "Woman, for this be all thy sins forgiven thee." Very kind of him. Now, regardless of whether that happened or not, because it is a legend, her performance was universally praised and adored. Prominent critics and actors wrote of her talent and skill in both singing and acting, with Thomas Sheridan, a prominent actor of the time, writing the following: "What then must the mighty force of oratorical expression be, when conveyed to the heart with all the superadded powers and charms of music? No person of sensibility who has had the good fortune to hear Mrs. Cibber sing the oratorio of the Messiah will find it very difficult to give credit to accounts of the most wonderful effects produced from so powerful a union." I think it's fair to say he liked it. Now, Messiah, of course, would go on to become the most beloved and famous of all choral works, restoring, thankfully, Handel's good fortune and cementing his status as the greatest composer of oratorio of the age. It wasn't until the work was performed in London before the king that the work itself really took off, and then, of course, it would go on to be performed all around the world thousands and thousands of times. It would become associated with the Foundling Hospital, itself actually an orphanage, and Handel would bequeath a copy of the Messiah to the Foundling Hospital, where it would be performed every year to raise funds for that vital institution. And of course, Susanna Cibber's association with this miraculous work all but erased the taint of the scandal. She would return triumphantly to London in the autumn of 1742 to numerous enthusiastic job offers. And her home in London would become a salon of sorts, and on Sunday evenings, prominent musicians, poets, and actors would visit and socialise, including frequently Handel, her brother Thomas, and many, many more. And you can see from these portraits and artefacts that Mrs. Cibber became a huge celebrity. She was engaged by Handel for his oratorio season, creating the role of Micah in Samson. And in 1744, she continued to sing for Handel in roles including Jael in Deborah, Lycas in Hercules, David in Saul, and she regularly sang in frequent performances of the oratorios L'Allegro, Alexander's Feast, and of course, Messiah, which she would return to on many, many occasions. In 1744, Mrs. Cibber would become the famous actor David Garrick's leading lady at Drury Lane. And this, of course, was the theatre managed by her former father-in-law. And Cibber and Garrick's partnership and friendship, which has been reflected in their letters, would continue until her death. From 1744 to 1765, Susanna Cibber added numerous dramatic roles to her repertory and was, after Garrick, the highest paid thespian in London. How about that? Contemporary reviews, dedications, letters, odes, and poems all refer to her ability to affect the listener deeply. She discovered her own love of composition, writing a masque which was performed in Covent Garden in 1751, though sadly the score is lost to time. Susanna Cibber ended her career as the most successful British female artist in history up until that point, and the forgotten scandal was but a footnote to her ultimate triumph. Susanna Cibber died on the 30th of January 1766 and was buried in the North Cloisters at Westminster Abbey. On the day of her death, Covent Garden and Drury Lane cancelled their performances and closed their doors as a tribute to one of the finest actors and singers of the day. Her friend and colleague Garrick, upon hearing of her death, said, "Then tragedy dies with her." And that was not the only tribute paid to her. The poet George Keat wrote in that year a poem to the memory of the celebrated Mrs. Cibber, an epic poem, some 12 pages in length. And it is available if you want to go and have a look for it. Just Google that title. In terms of quality, it leaves, I think, a little bit to be desired, but it is absolutely clear that she was revered and adored. Here is one of the stanzas. "It calls my Cibber to her house of clay, she who the passions can no more engage, rich in theatric glory, snatched away, the darling daughter of the British stage." So the story of Handel and the Scandal is really the story of Susanna Cibber, an extraordinary person who performed the great works of her time with exceptional artistry, delighting and beguiling audiences for decades. And much like Bach in last week's lecture, Susanna Cibber was a human being with incredible talents, but also personal challenges and difficulties. But her talent and her perseverance led her through her life and ultimately made her a household name in her own time. And hopefully this lecture will do a little bit to restore her reputation in our own modern times. And there is a rather delightful epilogue to this, everyone. Later this year, 2025, Sir Anthony Hopkins will be playing Handel in a brand new movie biopic about the composition of Messiah called The King of Covent Garden. And according to the proposed synopsis of the filming production, Susanna Cibber will feature prominently in the movie, and rightly so. So I hope you've enjoyed our lecture today on Handel and the Scandal. Do feel free to share it widely with anyone you think could do, with a bit of cheering up, because it's nice to have a story associated with classical music that doesn't end in sadness and tragedy. And next week, join me for something a little bit different. We're going to be taking in the world of harmony, in particular the use of minor chords and progressions to create significant drama. So much so that we're going to be looking at the music of Vivaldi. We're going to be looking at Danny Elfman's score for the movie Batman, but we're also going to be taking in works by Mahler and even some particularly interesting film scores by the great Bernard Herrmann. So lots still to come here on Home Choir. If you've enjoyed it, please do subscribe. Don't forget the like button, and we'll see you on Friday for some Bob Marley. Don't ever let it be said we don't give you a wide range and breadth of topics and things to enjoy here on the channel. Take care, everyone. We'll see you soon. All the best. Bye.